In looking at powerful people, the person who talks less always gives off a greater aura of power than the people that are yabbering all the time, that are talking. If you can't control your mouth, if you just keep talking and talking, it gives an aura to other people that you can't control anything else. You have no self-control, and that is a very unpowerful aura. When you're dealing with people who are unethical, where they're willing to do anything to get power and you're not, it's asymmetrical warfare. They have more options than you do. Real pleasure, fulfillment, comes from something much longer. So when you reach a point where you're 30 years old, you've been serious, you've learned all these skills, you've gone to school, but you've tried different jobs, and now you're ready to start your own business, and you have that level of, wow, I've done all these great things, that is a much greater pleasure and thrill that you'll ever have in life than from something immediate. You don't want to appeal to people's love, to the fact that they like you. You want to appeal to the fact that they need you. Because if they love you, love is a very tenuous emotion. In fact, it doesn't work very well in the work situation. It causes all kinds of problems. They'll get rid of you tomorrow, even though they like you. But if they need you, it's like pulling out all of these roots of a plant. To get rid of you, it's going to cause all kinds of damage all over the place. They need you and they can't get rid of you. So you need to make sure that your position in a company, in life in general, you're the only person who can do that. Don't just depend on one person. You just aren't just necessary to the boss, but you spread yourself out to 3 or 4 different networks. You get a sense of how the whole company is functioning. You have your roots in this place, in this place, in this place. So you have more knowledge. It's kind of spread around. And to get rid of you is going to cause a lot of problems, because you're not only involved here, but you're involved here, here, and here. And you have knowledge that nobody else has. So you want to have a kind of knowledge and skill base that makes you unique, you know? So, and that means, like, just don't depend on one skill, but have several skills, and don't be afraid to do that. That's, I think, is probably the key strategy here. When it comes to, if you're an entrepreneur, it's the same dynamic for an entrepreneur. It's the same dynamic for me. The way you make yourself necessary and others dependent on you is to be the only person who can do this job. You are so unique. There's only one Elon Musk. There's only one Steve Jobs, right? They're irreplaceable. They're not afraid to be themselves, have their own style. And so, you know, that's what secures their position. So if I wrote books like everybody else, I wouldn't have that position of power. But because I'm the only one, for better or for worse, who can write books the way I do, I have secured a position in the publishing world. So it's a law that applies everywhere. Yeah. In my book, Mastery, I call it knowing your life's task. This was what you were meant to accomplish in life, right? And you're very firm about it, and you feel very confident about it. And so when people come, like that editor did, and tell me that you shouldn't be a writer, you're able to deflect it because you have a dream, and nothing will get you to sidetrack from that dream. But also having a sense of accomplishment. So it's not that you're a bullshit artist, it's not that you're a con artist. You've actually accomplished A, B, and C in life, right? So if people come and attack me, I don't really care, because I have this that I can always fall back on. I have a book that sold 2 million copies. How many people can say that? I don't care, bring it on. I'm fine with that. But the one other thing I would say about that is that you want to, in the case for all people of power, in any position you are in life, I have a law in the 48 Laws of Power called never appear too perfect. And the danger in the world today is, the number one danger is envy. We live in a time of social media, etc., where it's massive envy, where we know what everybody else is doing in life, and we don't like to admit that we're envious, so we attack people passive-aggressively. We subvert them, we try and throw obstacles in their way. We criticize them when in fact we envy them. And the strategy there is to learn how to deflect envy. So if you're Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, you have to have some humor, you have to have some self-deprecating humor. You have to take the criticism that comes and kind of laugh at it and go along with it, so that you don't appear all stiff and rigid and defensive. So that's the other thing I would say. We have to be able to distinguish between what is legitimate criticism, and you have to look at the source, right? Yeah. So whenever I write a chapter, I give it to my girlfriend, Anna, because she's a great editor. I trust her. She critiques the hell out of them, but I've trusted her. But if some schmo off the street is writing on a YouTube video comments about me, etc., I don't pay it any attention because I don't know who he or she is or what their credentials are. There's one in there, interaction with boldness. And this is particularly applicable to entrepreneurs. It's about how human nature, we're kind of impressed and intimidated by people who do something, who enter in with a lot of confidence and boldness and a bit of drama and surprise. It kind of appeals to the animal in us. We're put back on our feet, and we're like, whoa, what's going on here? It's impressive. It creates a distinctive impression. Whereas if you kind of enter in like with your business or your book or in a meeting, and you're kind of half-assedly promoting an idea, it already looks weak before it even started, right? If you don't have confidence in your own idea, how can I have confidence? And there's an element almost of bullshit and playing a con man. And I have a story in there of Christopher Columbus, who was in fact came from the lower classes, had no aristocratic connections, was a mediocre navigator and captain, and he went and proposed this to the Portuguese king, this incredible expedition, as if he was an aristocrat. He was full of all of this confidence, and it created an impression on the other. There must be a reason for that confidence. Yeah. So having a sense of you were destined to accomplish something, that you feel that it's going to succeed, it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's more a sense of you feel you have to know your strengths and play to your strengths. So if I tried to show this kind of confidence and boldness on a basketball court, I'd be laughed off. If I tried to show it with my artwork and my painting and my doodling, I wouldn't be able to pull it off. But I know that I have one thing that I'm strong at. It's with words and language and writing. And so I can pull off being bold because I feel inside myself that inner confidence. You have to almost deceive yourself that you can accomplish this. So I can go on the list through classic introverts who've been incredibly successful. Albert Einstein was a terrible introvert, even though he seems like he's sort of this comic person who's good with people. He was terrible, very awkward and timid, but he knew one thing that he was so good at, and he pushed on it and pushed on it and pushed on it. And when it came to physics and relativity, there was nobody else who could argue with him. So play to your strength, play to what you know, what you're good at, what you've accomplished. And even the worst introvert in the world, like myself, can exude that kind of boldness. You have to know yourself. You have to know who you are, and you have to do some searching in there. So the passion thing, it's kind of a cliche in a way. I want you to look at the things that you were drawn to when you were 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. I do consulting work with a lot of people who are kind of confused about what I call your life's task, and we go through a process. You want to see something that attracted you here so deeply you can't even put it into words. Because the way the human brain works is that you don't learn things with any kind of intensity unless your emotions are deeply, deeply engaged, unless you're excited by the subject, right? And so if you're kind of in a field that is because of the money or because it kind of half interests you, you're not going to be learning, you're not going to have that intensity of focus that all successful people have. There's a kind of a level that you hit where the work is exactly what you were meant to do. It's what excites you, it's what your skill level, you're up to the challenge, or maybe it's a little above you, and it brings out the best in you. And you want to find out what that field is or what that subject is. And so once you find it, everything else will fall into place. So for me, I knew it was writing. I just couldn't figure out which writing form of it, but once it occurred, everything else just fell into place for me. When you're 36 years old, 35 years old, it's very easy to quit because you're not in your 20s anymore, and you're starting to think, I need to make money. I don't want to be living hand to foot for the rest of my life. So I understand that a lot of people reach that point, and I was very depressed. I was kind of going up and down and up and down. I think, okay, now I'm going to write this and this will be successful. I'll sell this screenplay, etc. And then it wouldn't happen, I'd be down, etc. So it was kind of a roller coaster. And there were moments when I was pretty much ready to give up, but I was never going to suddenly go to law school or go to business school. I was too old for that.
Yeah.
So I was thinking maybe I need to try a different form of writing where I can make a living. Maybe I need to get into television and sell my soul, even though that'll be very, very depressing for me because I don't feel comfortable with that form of writing. I have to get practical in some way. And that was a very depressing thought because, we all have dreams, particularly when we're a child. And to me, the worst thing in life, the worst feeling is you had dreams and you can never live up to them. They never happen in reality.
Yeah.
And so that would have been giving up on a dream. It would have been selling my soul. I would have been able to write, but I would have been unhappy. I may not even be alive right now if I had fallen down that rabbit hole. And I recognize how lucky I am.
In looking at powerful people, the person who talks less always gives off a greater aura of power than the people that are yabbering all the time, that are talking, that can't control their tongue. And the idea is, if you can't control your mouth, if you just keep talking and talking, it gives an aura to other people that you can't control anything else. You have no self-control. And that is a very unpowerful aura. And obviously, the more you talk, the more you are prone to say something kind of stupid and irrational that you're going to regret. And so powerful people know to command an audience. They sit there, they let other people talk and argue, and then occasionally they utter something that's maybe a little bit ambiguous. And everyone goes, whoa, that's very interesting. Robert said that. What does that mean? You look powerful, right? You give off an air of mystery, you give off an air of control. And so a lot of people have a hard time with it because they think, wow, shouldn't I just be able to say whatever I want and just talk? Well, no, you don't. Not in the social world, not in the work world. It's going to get you in trouble. Learn to control what you talk and learn that there are moments that saying less is actually much more powerful than just yammering on and on. Law of the jungle is don't get upset about it. It's part of the game. I got upset when that happened. I didn't say anything, I didn't do anything, but I got resentful. Nobody's recognizing my work. Whine. The adult, if I had been smarter, was, that's just how it is, Robert. Just calm down. At some point, people will see your screenplays or your books or whatever, and you'll be fine. But I'm trying to show you this is how the world operates, and don't be so naive, and don't think it's not like that. So if you're an underling, and you do the work, you don't want to take credit for it because it's going to get you in trouble, right? But powerful people have used for centuries the labor of other people and put their name on it to make themselves look powerful and to make them seem like they've got endless energy, okay? So you have to apply that law with intelligence. If you're an underling and you're doing some project, it's a group project, don't go out there and take credit for it because people are just going to laugh at you and you're going to make a terrible fool of yourself. So every law has a context, but that's powerful people use that law. And if you don't think that's how it operates, I'm sorry, but you're in for a world of pain. If you do a foolish mistake, there are two ways to go. And the common route is, that asshole, they screwed me over. It's their fault, right? Or I made that mistake, but, if circumstances had been better, if I had more money, if this person supported me, all would have gone well. That's what we naturally do. And that's the kind of person that never learns from life. So your first instinct must always be, and not your first instinct, I correct myself, your second instinct, because your first instinct is always going to be that. Your first instinct always will be, it was a mistake, but it wasn't mine. I'm not to blame, all right? Everybody does it, I do it. Your second instinct is to step back and go, whoa, wait a minute, that's not right. I'm fooling myself. Actually, I played a role in that, in what happened there. And what is that role that I played? What could I have done differently? Maybe it's very subtle. Maybe it was something in my body language that turned people off, that made them not like me. Or maybe it was something I said or I did that could have changed the circumstances. What is it that I did then you can learn from the experience. And if only 10% of it is your responsibility, at least see it as 30% so that you can learn from it and exaggerate your role in the mistake, because then you can learn from it. You can understand that you can correct these mistakes. So initially you're going to always blame the other person, then you're going to step back and you're going to go through this little dance. You're going to go, no, I think I've definitely played a part in what went wrong here. When you're dealing with people who are unethical, like a Putin kind of type, where they're willing to do anything to get power and you're not, it's asymmetrical warfare. They have more options than you do, okay? This person that did that to you, they're going to do anything for power, and it puts you at a constant disadvantage. What do? You have to do what they have in warfare called a deterrent strategy. You have to show this person that you're not somebody you can mess with, that you're going to do something to hurt them, but it's controlled and it's a one-time thing. You're going to damage their reputation. You're going to spread some nasty rumor about them. But you don't have to feel like you're lowering yourself. It's just, I'm doing it one time to show them that from now on, you better not mess with me, because damn it, I've got a gun in my back pocket and I can use it. You can't just roll over, because they're going to keep doing it to you time and again.